The land office smelled like old paper and broken dreams, and Preston Parrish signed his name next to a blotchy ink seal that looked suspiciously like a thumbprint made by something with only 3 fingers. The clerk, a weasel-faced man whose hands shook as he pushed the deed across the scarred oak desk, kept glancing at the bottom corner of the parchment where a block of text sat in harsh, angular script that Preston did not recognize. The price was absurd. 40 acres with a stone house, a barn and water rights for less than Preston had spent on his discharge papers and travel combined. The previous owner, Preston said, folding the deed carefully. What happened to him? The clerk's Adam's apple bobbed. Gave up, moved east. The land is yours free and clear. No liens, no back taxes. His eyes slid away. Good luck to you. Preston had spent 6 years sapping tunnels under enemy fortifications, had felt mountains shift overhead in the dark, and knew the particular flavor of a lie told by a frightened man. But he had 80 silver marks to his name, no family waiting anywhere, and winter coming on fast. He took the deed, ignored the itch between his shoulder blades, and rode west into the pine-thick hills, where the frontier frayed into something older. The farm sat in a valley where a cold spring bubbled up between gray stones and fed a creek that ran year-round. The house was fieldstone and timber, small but solid, with a good shake roof and shutters that closed tight. The barn needed a new door. The fields had gone to seed, but the soil was dark and rich where Preston dug his fingers in. He spent his first day hauling his travel pack inside, checking the chimney and walking the fence lines. Deer trails crisscrossed the northern boundary, and something bigger had rubbed the bark off a pine near the spring, leaving deep grooves that smelled of musk and resin. He slept hard that first night, dreamless, on a straw tick he found in the loft. The second morning, he woke to birdsong and pale light leaking through the shutters. He pulled on his boots, splashed water on his face from the bucket he had filled the night before, and walked to the door. The latch lifted easily. The door did not budge. Preston frowned, set his shoulder against the wood, and shoved. Nothing. He could hear something shifting on the other side, a creak of weight redistributing. He stepped back, checked the hinges. They were fine. He tried again, harder. The door gave perhaps an inch, then stopped as though pressed shut by a landslide. "You will hurt yourself," a voice said from outside. It was deep female, and carried the kind of calm authority Preston had only heard from senior officers who had survived 20 years of field command. He went still. "I am trying to leave my own house." "Not yet," a second voice said. This one was warmer, amused. "Sit down, we will explain." "I am standing in my own house," Preston said carefully, "and you are blocking my door. Move." A third voice, older and dry as autumn leaves, spoke in a language Preston did not know. It sounded like gravel rolling downhill, consonants that clicked and vowels that hummed in the chest. The first voice answered in the same tongue, then switched back to the common language. "We have introduced ourselves to each other," the first voice said. "Now we introduce ourselves to you. I am Gretna Redstone, wife of Carth Redstone, war leader of the Western Ridge. This is Margit Ironbow, wife of Durin Ironbow, war leader of the Northern Valley. The elder is Tekka Ashmark, wife of Horun Ashmark, war leader of the Southern Pass. We are your neighbors, and according to the deed you signed yesterday, we are also your kin keepers." Preston looked at the door. He looked at the window, which was too narrow for his shoulders. He walked back to the table, pulled out the deed, and unfolded it under the thin morning light. The angular script at the bottom mocked him. He could pick out a few symbols that looked almost like the old runic script soldiers scratched on barracks walls for luck, but the grammar was impenetrable. "What does it say?" he called. "It says," Gretna replied, that the holder of this land is kin claimed by the Redstone, Ironbow, and Ashmark clans. It is an old protection, written into the deed 40 years ago when a human farmer saved our mothers from a starving winter. In exchange, we claimed him as brother and kin. He never married, had no children, but his heir would inherit the bond. You are now that heir. I bought the farm from a man named Wilker, Preston said, not from your mother's friend. Wilker bought it from Hassel. Hassel bought it from Greaves. Greaves bought it from our mother's kin brother when he grew too old to work the land. The clause does not break. You are ours now. We feed you, mend you, and manage you as we see fit. Preston set the deed down with great care, aware that his hands wanted to crumple it. He had spent 6 years taking orders from men who treated him like a tool to be used and discarded. He had left the army specifically to be free of that. He walked back to the door and tested it again. Immovable. I do not need managing, he said. You are alone, Margit's warm voice replied. No wife, no children, no parents. Winter is 6 weeks away. The fields are wild. You have no stores, no stock, no hay cut. You need managing. I need to get out of my house. When you agree to sit and talk. Preston stared at the door. He could break the hinges off with his pry bar. He could go out the window if he tore out the frame. He could also sit down like a fool, wait them out, and see if stubbornness was currency they understood. He had lived on stubbornness for years. It was the one coin he had in endless supply. He sat down at the table in silence, folded his arms, and did not say another word. An hour passed. Then two. The sun climbed higher. He heard low voices outside, conversational, discussing something that involved numbers and baskets. His stomach growled. He ignored it. He had gone longer without food in worse places. Around midday, something scraped against the door. A shadow moved past the window. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, circled the house. He heard the creak of the barn door opening, a pause, then it closing again. More footsteps. Silence. By late afternoon, Preston's patience was a frayed thread, but his stubbornness was an iron bar that had been tested in the deep dark under siege walls. He did not move. He did not speak. He sat, arms folded, and stared at the door as though he could burn holes through it with sheer will. The sun dipped low. Gold light slanted across the floor. The latch rattled, lifted, and the door swung inward. A figure filled the frame, had to duck slightly to step through, and Preston found himself looking at someone who redefined his understanding of the word presence. Gretna Redstone was built like a fortress. She stood close to 7 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, arms thick with muscle that moved under green skin like stones shifting underwater. Her hair was black streaked with silver, braided in a crown around her head, and her face was all strong lines and sharp angles softened only slightly by the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw. Her eyes were the color of dark amber, and they assessed Preston with the same cool efficiency he imagined she used to assess supply lines and defensive positions. She wore leather and wool dyed in shades of rust and gray, practical, well-made, and carried herself with the kind of certainty that came from never being questioned. Behind her came Margit Ironbow, nearly as tall but broader through the hips, her green skin a shade lighter, almost mossy. Her hair was brown and loose around her shoulders, and her face was softer, rounder, with smile lines around her eyes and mouth. She looked like someone who laughed often and meant it. The third was Tekka Ashmark, older, her skin weathered to the color of pine bark, her hair white and cropped short. She moved carefully, favoring her left leg, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. They looked at Preston. He looked back. Gretna pulled out a chair, sat down without asking, and set a basket on the table. Margit took another chair. Tekka claimed the third. The house suddenly felt very small. "You are stubborn," Gretna said. It was not a question. Yes, Preston said. Good. Stubborn men survive winters. She opened the basket and began pulling out food. Bread dense and dark, cheese wrapped in cloth, dried meat, apples, a clay jar of something that smelled like honey. Eat. I did not ask for food. You need it anyway. She pushed the bread across the table. We are not here to fight you, Preston Parrish. We are here because the bond requires it, and because you are alone, and because we do not let kin starve out of pride. I am not your kin. The deed says otherwise. Tekka's voice was rust and iron. You signed it. You accepted the land. The bond is sealed. Preston looked at the bread. His stomach cramped with hunger, but he did not reach for it. I bought a farm, not a family. Margit laughed, bright and sudden. You cannot buy family. You are claimed. There is a difference. I do not want to be claimed. That, Gretna said, is not relevant. The bond is law. It was witnessed by the magistrate when the deed was first written. It is registered in the land office. You cannot break it without giving up the farm. Preston felt the trap snap shut. He had spent nearly everything he had on this land. He had nowhere else to go, no trade that did not involve crawling back to the army and re-enlisting, which would kill something in him that was barely still alive. He looked at Gretna, at Margit, at Tekka, and saw that they knew it. They were not cruel, they were simply certain. What do you want? He asked. For you to live through winter, Gretna said. For the spring to stay clean and the land to stay farmed. For the bond to hold. Why does it matter to you? Tekka leaned forward. Because 40 years ago your predecessor saved our mothers when human men would have let them starve. Because the spring on this land feeds our clans. Because we protect what is ours, and you are ours now, whether you like it or not. Preston sat back. He felt the weight of it, the shape of a cage built out of obligation and old debts and something that looked almost like care. He did not trust it. He did not trust them. But he was tired and hungry, and the bread smelled like safety in a way he had not felt in years. He reached out, broke off a piece, and ate in silence. Gretna nodded, satisfied. We will send someone tomorrow. You need help with the farm. The fields must be cleared, the barn repaired, wood cut for winter. You cannot do it alone in 6 weeks. I do not need help. You do. Stop arguing. She stood, and the other two followed. Her name is Lysa Rosecrag. She is our youngest sister, unmarried, and has nothing better to do than make sure you do not kill yourself trying to prove you are capable. Preston opened his mouth to argue, saw the look in Gretna's eyes, and closed it again. He had seen that look before, on the faces of officers who had already made their decision and were simply waiting for you to catch up. They left. The door stayed open. Preston sat at the table, eating slowly, and watched the last light drain from the valley. The stars came out cold and bright, and somewhere in the distance, he heard the low, rolling call of a horn made from bone or shell, echoing off the hills. It sounded like a greeting. It sounded like a warning. He finished the food, banked the fire, and climbed into the loft. Sleep was a long time coming. Lysa Rosecrag arrived at dawn with a handcart, 3 hives strapped down under netting, and an expression that suggested she would rather be anywhere else. She was smaller than her sisters, perhaps 5.5 feet tall, built lean and wiry with the kind of economical muscle that came from work that required precision instead of brute strength. Her skin was the green of new leaves. Her hair was black and cut short in a way that made her pointed ears obvious, and her tusks were small and sharp, barely protruding past her upper lip. She wore a tunic and trousers in undyed linen, boots that had been resoled more than once, and a leather apron with pockets that bulged with tools. "You are Preston," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, I am Lysa. I have been volunteered to supervise you." Her tone made it clear what she thought of that. "My sisters-in-law believe you will die without help. I believe you are a grown man who should be allowed to make his own mistakes. Unfortunately, I do not get a vote." Preston almost smiled. "Neither do I, it seems." She set the handcart down near the barn and began unstrapping the hives with quick, efficient movements. "I keep bees. I need to move 3 hives to your land because the ridge is overcrowded and the bees are fighting. In exchange, I will help you prepare for winter. When spring comes, we revisit the arrangement. Does that suit you? Do I have a choice?" "No," she looked at him, dark eyes measuring, "but I will pretend you do if it makes you feel better." He did smile then, brief and crooked. "Where do you want the hives?" "Near the spring, south-facing, sheltered from the north wind." She tilted her head. "You are not arguing. Would it help?" "Not even a little." They worked in silence, carrying the hives one by one to a spot Lysa selected after walking the land for 20 minutes. She handled the bees with a calm confidence that reminded Preston of how he used to handle explosives, the same awareness that one wrong move would bring swift and painful consequences. She placed the hives on stones to keep them off the damp ground, checked the entrances, and stepped back. "They will settle in a few days," she said. "Do not bother them. They will not bother you. Understood?" She turned to the fields, hands on her hips, and surveyed the wilderness of weeds and volunteer saplings. "This is a disaster. I know. We need to clear at least half by first frost. Plant winter rye to hold the soil. You have tools?" "Some. A mattock, a spade, an axe. That will do." She walked to the barn, inspected the broken door, the missing boards, the hay mow that had rotted through in one corner. "This first. If you have no barn, you have nowhere to store wood or tools or stock. We repair it, then we work the fields." Preston had expected orders. He had expected management. He had not expected competence delivered with the blunt efficiency of someone who had no patience for stupidity, but all the patience in the world for hard work. He found himself nodding. Agreed. They spent the next 3 days on the barn. Lysa knew carpentry the way Preston knew sapping, with the kind of deep structural understanding that came from years of practice. She could sight a line by eye, cut a board so it fit tight on the first try, and swing a hammer with a rhythm that made the work go faster just by watching her. She did not talk much, but when she did, it was to point out something Preston had missed or to ask a question that was actually useful. "Why the army?" she asked on the 3rd day as they were bracing the new door frame. "No family, no land, no trade." He drove a peg home with 3 sharp blows. "The army takes anyone. And now I have land." He glanced at her. "And apparently a family I did not ask for," she huffed, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Gretna means well. She sees someone alone and assumes they need fixing. And you?" "I think people break for reasons, and fixing them without asking is how you make the break worse." She tested the frame, leaned her weight against it. "Solid. But I also think refusing help out of pride is how you die stupid and alone, so maybe we are both right." Preston considered that. "You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who wanted to be here." Lysa looked at him, and for the first time he saw something shift in her expression, a crack in the wall she kept between herself and the world. "I am a beekeeper. I live alone on the ridge. I make honey and wax and mead, and I like it that way. Gretna decided I need a project. You are the project. I am making the best of it. Sorry to be an inconvenience." "You are." She picked up the hammer. "But the bees like it here, and the work is honest, so I will survive." They finished the barn that afternoon and started on the fields the next morning. It was brutal work, mattock and spade and axe, tearing out saplings and hacking through root systems that had spent years spreading unchecked. Preston's hands blistered, then bled, then calloused over. Lysa worked beside him without complaint, her smaller frame somehow generating the same output, and by the end of the first week they had cleared a quarter of the northern field. They fell into a rhythm. Dawn to dusk, work. Evenings, they ate together. Simple meals made from the supplies Margit kept delivering despite Preston's protests. Lysa would check the bees, Preston would chop firewood, and they would sit by the fire and not talk about anything important. It was the closest Preston had come to peaceful in years. The third week, a man arrived on a black horse, well-dressed, with a servant trailing behind on a mule. He sat in his saddle and looked down at Preston with the kind of expression that suggested he was calculating worth and finding it insufficient. "You are the new owner," the man said. "I am. Thaddeus Merrick, I own the mill downstream." He did not offer his hand. "I am here to make you an offer." Preston leaned on his mattock. "I am listening." "I want to buy water rights to the spring. I need to expand my mill pond, and the creek that runs through your land is the best source. I will pay you 100 silver marks." It was more than twice what Preston had paid for the entire farm. He felt the trap before he saw it. "No," he said. Merrick's eyes narrowed. "That is a generous offer. The water rights are not for sale." "Everything is for sale, boy. Name a price." Preston straightened. He was used to being called boy by officers who outranked him. He was not used to it from civilians who thought money made them superior. "The answer is no. Get off my land." Merrick's expression went cold. "You will regret this." "Maybe." Preston met his eyes. "But not today." The man wheeled his horse and rode off, his servant scrambling to follow. Preston watched them go, then looked up to find Lysa standing in the barn door, a saw in one hand and something dark and furious in her eyes. "That was Merrick," she said. "I gathered. He wants to dam the spring." "I gathered that too." She walked over, slow and deliberate. "If he dams the spring, the creek stops flowing. The water that feeds the clan's wells goes dry. We die of thirst or we move, and we have been here for 3 generations. We will not move." Preston looked at her, at the saw she was gripping hard enough to make her knuckles pale. "Then he does not dam the spring. He ruined the last farmer, Wilker. He bought up his debts, called them due all at once, forced him to sell. He will do the same to you. I have no debts. He will make them. He owns the land office clerk. He owns the magistrate's secretary. He will forge a lien or a contract, and you will wake up one morning to find bailiffs on your porch." She set the saw down with great care. "The bond is the only thing protecting you. As long as you are kin-claimed, the clans can challenge any debt in court. But if you renounce the bond, you are alone and he will crush you." Preston felt the shape of it, the same trap he had sensed in the land office, now showing its teeth. "Why did Gretna not tell me this?" "Because she thought you would run. She wanted you to settle first, to see that the land is worth fighting for." Lysa's voice was quiet. "Was she wrong?" He looked around, at the barn they had repaired, at the fields they had cleared, at the small stone house that had started to feel like a place he could live instead of just survive. He thought about the cold spring that bubbled up clean and endless, about the stars at night and the silence that was not loneliness. "No," he said. "She was not wrong." Lysa nodded, something easing in her shoulders. "Then we fight." "How?" "We finish the farm, we make it profitable. We make sure there is no angle he can use to claim you are neglecting the land or defaulting on some imaginary obligation. And if he comes at us anyway, we make him do it in open court, where the clans can stand witness." "That is not much of a plan." "It is the only plan we have." Preston picked up his mattock. "Then we had better get to work." They worked like the world was ending in 6 weeks, because in a way it was. They cleared the rest of the northern field and half the southern. They planted winter rye, broadcasting the seed by hand and harrowing it in with a frame Lysa built from scrap lumber. They cut firewood, stacked it under the eaves, cut more. Preston repaired the fence lines while Lisa sealed the gaps in the house, packing moss and clay into the spaces between stones. Margit delivered a pregnant sow and 10 chickens. Tekka brought wool for a winter coat and stayed to teach Preston how to card and spin it, her gnarled hands patient on the wheel. Gretna came once a week, checking their progress, offering no praise but no criticism either. She brought news from the clans, news that Merrick had been seen riding the boundary lines, that he had hired men from the capital, that he was asking questions about the deed and the kinship clause. "He is looking for a weakness," Gretna said. "Do not give him one." Preston did not sleep much. When he did, he dreamed of tunnels collapsing, of being buried alive under the weight of earth and obligation. He would wake in the dark, heart pounding, and remind himself that this was different, that he had chosen this, or at least had not run from it. That mattered. He thought it mattered. Lisa noticed. She did not ask, but she started bringing chamomile tea in the evenings, the kind that smelled like apples and made the edges of panic soften. She would sit across from him and talk about the bees, about how the hives were settling, about the way the workers danced to tell each other where the best flowers were. Her voice was low and calm, and Preston found himself listening not to the words but to the rhythm of them, the same way he used to listen to the sound of water dripping in the tunnels to know he was still alive. One night, 5 weeks into autumn, she asked, "Why did you really leave the army?" He looked at the fire. "I stopped believing the reasons we fought were worth the dying. That must have been hard. It was easier than staying." She nodded, slow. "I left the clan hold when I was 17. Moved to the ridge, built my own house, started keeping bees. Everyone said I was running away." "Were you?" "Yes," she smiled, small and crooked. "But I was running toward something too, toward quiet, toward work that did not require me to be anything other than good at it. And now you are here. Now I am here." She looked at him. "With you. Doing work that matters. It is strange. Supervising me. No, mattering." She said it like a confession. "I thought I wanted to be alone. I thought quiet was enough. But this, the work, the knowing it is keeping the spring clean and the clan safe, it is different. It is better." Preston felt something shift in his chest, a small thing, fragile like the first crack in ice. "I am glad you are here." She blinked, startled. "You are?" "Yes. Even though you did not ask for it, even though." He reached for the tea, hand steady. "You are sharp and stubborn, and you do not let me lie to myself. That is worth something." Lisa stared at him, color rising in her cheeks, and then she looked away fast, like she had been caught stealing. "You are strange, Preston Parrish. So I have been told." She huffed, but it sounded pleased, and they sat in comfortable silence until the fire burned low. The first frost came 2 days later. The rye was in, the firewood stacked, the barn sealed tight. Preston stood in the yard at dawn and watched his breath steam in the cold air, felt the ache in his muscles that came from 6 weeks of labor, and thought maybe, just maybe, he had done enough. Then the bailiffs arrived. There were 2 of them, both on horseback, both armed, with a man in clerk's robes between them. They rode up to the house like they owned it, dismounted, and the clerk unrolled a scroll. "Preston Parrish," he read, voice high and nasal. "You are hereby summoned to answer charges of debt default before the magistrate. According to records, you owe Thaddeus Merrick 300 silver marks for materials and services rendered during the purchase of this property. You have 7 days to settle the debt or forfeit the land." Preston felt the cold settle deeper than the frost. "I owe Merrick nothing. I paid the land office directly. The debt was incurred by the previous owner and is attached to the land. It transfers with the deed." "That is not how property law works." The clerk smiled, thin and mean. "It is how the law works when the magistrate signs the writ. 7 days, Parrish. Pay or leave." They rode off before Preston could respond. He stood in the yard, the scroll in his hand, and felt the trap snap shut for the second time. The debt was fabricated. He knew it, they knew it, but unless he could prove it in court, it did not matter. Lisa came running from the barn. What did they want? He handed her the scroll. She read it, her expression darkening with every line. This is false. Wilker never owed Merrick anything. Merrick bought his debts from other creditors. He did not create them. Can we prove that? Not in 7 days. She crumpled the scroll, but the bond can. If you are clan kin, the clans can challenge the debt on your behalf. They can demand a full accounting, witnesses, records. It will take months, and Merrick will not wait that long. Preston looked at her. What do I have to do? You go to the magistrate. You invoke the bond. You surrender sole ownership of the farm and accept full kinship with the clans. Her voice was quiet. You give up everything you fought for to keep this land. Your savings become clan holdings. Your decisions become clan decisions. You are no longer alone, but you are also no longer free. He thought about the spring, about the cold, clean water that fed the valley. He thought about Margit's laughter, Tekka's patience, Gretna's certainty. He thought about Lisa, standing in front of him with a crumpled scroll in her hand and something bright and fierce in her eyes. When do we leave? He asked. The magistrate's hall was a stone building in the nearest town, 3 hours south by horse. Gretna, Margit, and Tekka came with them, riding tall war horses that made Preston's borrowed mare look like a pony. They arrived at midday and found Merrick already there, standing beside a table piled with documents, his expression smug. The magistrate was an old man with a gray beard and tired eyes. He looked at Preston, at the orcs, and sighed. State your business. Preston stepped forward. I invoke the kinship clause on the deed to the Northern Valley Farm. I claim clan protection and challenge the debt filed by Thaddeus Merrick. The magistrate's eyes sharpened. You understand what that means? I do. You surrender individual ownership. The land becomes clan held. Your personal assets become clan assets. You are bound to the clans in all legal matters. I understand. Merrick lunged forward. This is absurd. He cannot hide behind some ancient barbarian contract to avoid his legal obligations. The kinship clause is registered and recognized by this court, the magistrate said coldly. It predates your claim by 40 years. If he invokes it, your debt claim must be reviewed under clan law, which requires full documentation, independent witnesses, and a 6-month review period. That is theft. I have a signed writ, which will be reviewed. The magistrate looked at Preston. Are you certain? Preston thought about the silence in the valley, about the way the stars looked cold and clean over the hills. He thought about Lisa's voice in the dark, talking about bees and quiet and work that mattered. He nodded. I am certain. The magistrate struck his gavel once. Let the record show that Preston Parrish has invoked clan kinship. The debt claim is suspended pending review. Case dismissed. Merrick went purple. You have not heard the last of this. Probably not, the magistrate agreed. But I have heard the last of it today. Get out. They left in silence, rode north in silence, and did not speak until they were back in the valley. Gretna dismounted first, looked at Preston, and nodded. You chose well, she said. I gave up everything. No, you gave up ownership. That is not the same thing. She smiled, small and genuine. Welcome to the family, brother. Preston stood in the yard, the cold wind cutting through his coat, and felt the weight of it settle. He was kin claimed. He was bound. He was no longer alone. Lisa walked over slow and stopped in front of him. You did not tell me. No. You went to the magistrate and gave up your savings and your land and did not say a word. Would you have tried to stop me? Yes. Her voice was fierce. Because you should not have to sacrifice everything just to keep the spring clean. It was not just the spring. Then what was it? He looked at her, at the way the wind pulled at her short hair, at the green of her skin against the gray autumn sky, at the small tusks that caught the light when she scowled. It was you. All of you. Gretna and Margit and Tekka and the clans in this place. It was worth it. Lysa stared at him, something breaking open in her expression, something raw and unguarded. You are the strangest man I have ever met. You said that already. I am saying it again. She reached out, hesitated, then put her hand on his arm. Her fingers were cold. Thank you. For what? For choosing us. For not running. She smiled, crooked and bright. For being stubborn enough to make it work. He covered her hand with his brief and then let go before he could second-guess it. I had good help. She laughed, bright and surprised, and the sound echoed off the hills. Winter came down hard that year, snow piling high in the valleys and ice locking the creek into silence. Preston and Lysa worked together to keep the stock fed, the fire burning, the hives wrapped in straw and cloth to survive the cold. The clans came and went, bringing food and news and help when the drifts got too deep to manage alone. Preston learned their names, their faces, their children. He learned which songs they sang at solstice and which stories they told around the fire. He learned that being kin meant obligation, but it also meant belonging, and for the first time in his life, those two things did not feel like opposites. Lysa stayed. She said it was because the bees needed tending. She said it was because Preston would freeze to death without someone to remind him to eat. She said a lot of things, and Preston learned to hear the truth underneath the words, which was that she did not want to leave. That she had found something in the valley that her quiet ridge had never given her. That maybe she was as tired of being alone as he was. They did not talk about it. They worked, side by side, and when the snow was too deep to work, they sat by the fire and she taught him how to render beeswax, and he taught her how to splice rope, and neither of them mentioned the way their shoulders touched or the way the silence felt warm. 2 months into winter, a rider came from the town. The magistrate's review was complete. Merrick's debt claim had been found fraudulent. The documents had been forged, the signatures false, the whole thing a fabrication designed to steal the land. Merrick had been fined, his writ revoked, and warned that any further legal action against Preston or the clans would result in criminal charges. Preston read the letter twice slowly and then handed it to Lysa. She read it, smiled, and folded it up with great care. You won, she said. We won. Stubborn man. Sharp woman. She looked at him, something soft in her eyes, and he thought about leaning forward, about closing the distance between them, about finding out if the warmth he felt when she smiled was just his imagination. He did not move. He had spent too many years learning that wanting something did not mean you got to keep it. Preston, Lysa said quietly, I need to tell you something. His chest tightened. All right. I think I am falling in love with you. The world stopped. The fire crackled. The wind rattled the shutters. Preston stared at her, at the way her hands twisted together in her lap, at the way her ears had gone slightly pink. You think, he managed, I am trying to be precise. She looked at him, brave and scared in equal measure. I have never done this before. I have never wanted to. But you are kind and stubborn, and you see the work I do as mattering, not just as bees and honey, but as something real. And I want to stay. Not because Gretna told me to, but because I cannot imagine leaving. Preston reached out slow and took her hand. I am glad. Just glad. I am terrible with words. He laced his fingers through hers. But I think I fell in love with you the day you told me people break for reasons. You see me. Not the soldier, not the project, just me. I did not know how much I needed that until I had it. Lysa's breath hitched. She squeezed his hand, hard, and then she was leaning forward, and so was he, and their foreheads touched, gentle, her tusks brushing his cheek. They stayed like that, breathing together, and it was the closest thing to peace Preston had ever known. Spring came slowly, the snow melting back to reveal the valley green and new. The rye sprouted thick and healthy. The bees woke, buzzing loud and busy, and Lisa's hives thrived. Preston planted a kitchen garden, repaired the plow, and started breaking the southern field for oats. The clans helped, as they always did, and the work became a rhythm, steady and sure. Merrick tried once more, sending hired men in the night to set fire to the barn. They were caught by the clan patrols, held until the magistrate's guard arrived and arrested. Merrick himself vanished, rumor saying he fled east before criminal charges could be filed. The mill changed hands, bought by a cooperative of farmers who treated the water with respect and worked with the clans instead of against them. The valley settled into peace. One morning in late spring, Preston woke to find Lisa standing at the window, watching the sunrise. He came up behind her, rested his chin on her shoulder, and she leaned back into him. "I want to marry you," he said. She turned in his arms, eyes wide. "What?" "I want to marry you. I want to stand in front of the clans and make it official. I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours," he swallowed. "If you will have me." Lisa stared at him, and then she laughed, bright and startled. "You are asking me to marry you?" "Yes." "You, the man who did not want to be claimed by anyone, is asking me to claim you for life?" "Yes." She cupped his face in her hands, thumbs brushing his cheekbones. "Then yes, you stubborn, wonderful man. Yes." They were married at the autumn kinfire, the great bonfire the clans lit every year to celebrate the harvest. Gretna officiated, reading the words in both languages, human and Orcish, her voice carrying over the gathered crowd. Margit wept happy tears. Tekka carved their names into the packed stone that stood at the valley's heart, adding a new line to the old record. The clans sang and danced and drank mead made from Lisa's honey, and Preston stood at the center of it all, Lisa's hand in his, and felt the pieces of his life finally fit together. The farm thrived. The fields produced grain and vegetables, the bees produced honey and wax, and the spring stayed clean and clear, feeding the valley and the clans beyond. Preston and Lisa worked side by side, day after day, season after season, and the work was hard, but it was theirs. 2 years after the wedding, Lisa told him she was pregnant. She said it quietly, standing in the kitchen with flour on her hands and a loaf of bread rising on the table. Preston stared at her, joy and terror in equal measure, and then he picked her up and spun her around until she was laughing and swatting at him to stop. Their daughter was born in late spring, small and squalling, with green skin and tiny tusks and her mother's dark eyes. They named her Leela, and Gretna declared her the first child of the new kinship, blessed by the clans and welcomed with gifts of silver and wool, and a carved cradle that had been in the Redstone family for generations. Leela grew fast, bright and curious, toddling after her mother to check the hives and helping her father dig in the garden. When she was 3, Lisa told Preston she was pregnant again. This time it was a boy, born in the winter with his father's brown hair and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Oren, and he was as loud and wild as his sister was thoughtful. The house grew, room by room, as the family did. Preston built a second floor, then a third bedroom. Lisa expanded the bee yard, adding more hives, and started teaching Leela how to read the workers' dances. The farm became a gathering place, somewhere the clans came for festivals and celebrations, and the valley rang with voices and laughter. On a cool autumn evening, 15 years after Preston had first signed the deed, he stood on the porch and watched the sun set over the hills. Leela was inside, helping her mother render wax. Oren was in the barn feeding the stock. The fields were full, The hives were strong, and the spring still bubbled up cold and clear between the gray stones. Lysa came out, drying her hands on her apron, and leaned against the railing beside him. "What are you thinking?" "That I was lucky." "Lucky how?" "That I bought this farm. That 3 giant orc wives blocked my door and claimed me. That you were sent to supervise me." He looked at her, at the silver starting to thread through her black hair, at the lines around her eyes that came from smiling. "That I was stubborn enough to stay." Lysa took his hand, laced their fingers together. "I was the lucky one. I found someone who saw bees and honey as mattering. Who saw me as mattering. You do, so do you." She squeezed his hand. "We matter together." He kissed her soft and slow, tasting honey and home. Behind them, Leela laughed at something Oren said, the sound bright and clear. The fire crackled in the hearth. The stars began to come out, cold and clean, and Preston thought about the deed he had signed all those years ago, about the angular script he could not read and the bond he had not understood. He understood now. Kin was not a cage. It was a foundation. It was the thing that held you when the world tried to tear you down. It was work and obligation and care, all tangled together, and it was worth every sacrifice. They stood together on the porch, watching the night come on, and Preston knew, bone deep and certain, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The valley was his. The clans were his. The woman beside him was his, and he was theirs fully and finally in all the ways that mattered. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and cold water, and somewhere in the distance the clan horns called out, low and rolling, echoing across the hills. It sounded like a greeting. It sounded like welcome. It sounded like home.